Can you see my screen? I think it's not showing up. Can you see my screen? It's not showing. Can you see my screen? Hi, Connor. Can you hear me, right? Just to confirm.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so hello everyone. Good afternoon. It's Muhammad Ishan Dakhi with you, joining you from Hub of Finance Transformation, Dubai. First of all, we warmly welcome you to this exciting webinar on finance and accounting recruitment trends in the Middle East region that is going to be conducted by Hub of Finance Transformation in collaboration with Al-Kami Search, one of the leading recruitment firm in UAE. So first of all, I would just like to give you a quick overview of what we are going to cover today and some of the logistics items. It's going to be almost a 45 minutes webinar, and we are going to discuss some of the key trends in the Middle East region from the finance and accounting recruitment perspective with our guest speaker, Connor, who has already joined us from Dubai. And then we will also want to keep this webinar more interactive. So we will be taking your questions as well, what questions you have. Because of course, when you look for any accounting or finance jobs, you should take a more strategic approach. And you should also understand what's going on in the market, what is expected in the market, what are the skill sets in demand, and which industries are hiring and which roles are open. So that's all what we are going to discuss today. And whatever questions you have, you can just drop your questions in the chat box, or alternatively, if you are joining from social media or YouTube, you can just put your question in the comments box, and we will try to address as maximum questions as possible during our Q&A session at the end that we will have. So our guest speaker for today is Connor McHugh, who is the founder of Alchemy Search, that is based out of Dubai. A recruitment firm that is, I think, actively involved in across multiple roles in finance and accounting across the Middle East region. And Connor is also expert in accounting, tax, and treasury recruitment. He's also involved in very senior level appointment across the Middle East region. I believe he has extensive experience in this domain of recruitment during his last career, almost for the last, I think, more than 10 years. He worked with various international recruitment firms, and he has, I think, a great passion in this area. And that's what he's going to share his insights and experience today in our interactive discussion. So first of all, Connor, welcome to the webinar, and thank you very much for joining.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so we are now going to discuss the latest article that is already published by Connor, and we are going to share with you the link shortly in the comments section. So the thing, obviously, we want to know, first of all, what is going to happen and what has happened in the first and the second quarter in the Middle East region from the finance and accounting recruitment perspective. And also we would like to understand from Connor, like, what is his outlook for the second half of 2022, we can say quarter 3 and 4 from finance recruitment perspective. So if you can shed some light on this.
Yeah, no problem at all. Okay, yeah, so firstly, I think, as Mohammed said, that I have basically published an article today on LinkedIn. So, you know, when the link is shared, feel free to have a look, as you get something tangible from the webinar today. But look, in general, the first half of the year was very good, I would say. You know, there was quite a bit of recruitment in Q1, in Q2 as well. Post Ramadan, there was quite a bit of junior to mid-level hiring. At the senior end of the market, it's been busy, but it's a bit like a pyramid that obviously the higher you go up the pyramid, the less opportunities there are for candidates. So, you know, if you're the sweet spot at the moment, I'd say, is mid-level recruitment from sort of finance manager, finance controller level. There's quite a few roles. While sort of when you go north of that into finance director, CFO, it's just a bit trickier, is how I would see that. But in Q3, which obviously the second half of the year, which we're now currently in, the market does slow down quite a bit. In July and August, there's a lot of people who go on travel, take vacation, and ultimately the knock-on effect for recruitment is that the hiring just stops, it gets put on hold. So, you know, to answer the question on the outlook, I would say the outlook is still good. There's a lot of stuff happening in Dubai in particular, but I can't see it really picking up properly until September onwards. So the best way to think about it is that once the schools start, more than likely the mothers and fathers who are in the senior positions will be back on the ground, and the roles, you know, everything gets moving again, so to speak. So the second half of the year, Q4 is traditionally always the best quarter for recruitment because companies have budget they need to spend. If they don't spend it, it gets taken away from them. So yeah, it's upbeat. The first half has been better than expected. Q3, I think, will slow down a little, but I think from September to December, there'll be a lot of movement in the market.
Okay, that's great. I believe that's a really a good overview of the roles that are available. So let's, because our participants who are joining from are obviously they're from different levels of seniority. Some are at the start of their career, some at the mid level. So let's, if we can shed some light on on the level of seniority and the different roles that are available. So if we start from the junior level role that are available, if you can give some overview in the UAE.
Yeah, so junior level, so if you're looking from sort of senior accountant, assistant accountant, management accountant, financial accountant, there is quite a few roles. A lot of in Q1, it was a lot more prominent than Q2. So in Q1, post the new year, companies get fresh budget. Finance managers, finance controllers will usually replenish their team, maybe replace their team. So there was quite a bit of movement in Q1. In Q2, that slowed down quite a bit just because a lot of the hiring was done at this level. The hiring process is usually relatively quite quick, maybe 1-2 rounds interviews, then offer letter. Well, when you go from mid to senior, you're going to get a lot longer processes, especially in UAE. Things don't move as quick as possible. So, but the good thing is in Q3 that we're in now, if there is roles that level, companies will still hire because it doesn't need, CFO or CEO sign off. So I do anticipate in Q3 the junior end will still be quite positive. If that helps.
Okay, that's great. So in terms of the mid-level finance roles, is there any specific roles that you would suggest, like, or which are like in terms of current openings, or you are expecting in the next quarters?
Yeah, so mid-level roles, so anything from finance controller, finance manager, then there's a lot of head of finance positions. The big thing in UAE at the moment is obviously there's a lot of startups coming out to the region and setting up here. So what we're seeing is that these companies, they don't need to hire a CFO, they don't need to hire a finance director. They're not, at that stage or level. So there's a big spike in demand for heads of finance. So these will be people who'll be, mid-level, looking for that next step up. Maybe they're a financial controller and their boss is a finance director and they're not moving anytime soon. So, you haven't got much room for growth. So this is a good opportunity to go into a role where you're very hands-on, and can really grow with that business. So that's an area which we're seeing a lot of activity in. So I think in my article, I've noted that if you're working in a startup as a senior accountant, as a finance manager, and you have a boss, be it a head of finance or financial controller, I would advise trying to get a lot of experience, because if you can get that hands-on experience of setting up a finance function from scratch, they're the jobs that are in demand. So when we're hiring a head of finance for a startup, one of the things they'll ask is make sure the person has experience at doing this before, because they want someone to come in that can take ownership and doesn't need to be handheld. So, that's definitely an area which we've seen and we're going to see a lot more growth in, I feel.
Okay. So when you mention head of finance, so is it more on the FP&A side? Like, are the like client companies are looking for more with FP&A skills, or is it like purely on the treasury side, or?
So yeah, the FP&A piece, which in the article again, there's a big push on that. The reality with FP&A is it is the forward-looking side of the business, where when times are tough, they're probably unfortunately one of the first sides to get cut in a business. So it's a sign of the positivity in the region that a lot of companies are looking for people with the FP&A experience. So the forward-looking side, the value add side, how are we comparing to our competitors? How can you add value? So again, this is another area which is reflecting the economy at the moment. The demand for these sort of professionals is it's in the good times, or when people are optimistic about the future. So I think, in UAE in general, compared to other parts of the world, the finance functions are traditionally a lot smaller. So you'll do a bit of FP&A, you'll do a bit of controllership. So it's just good to get exposure to as much different areas in finance, especially in the UAE, because head of finance, they may say it's 70% FP&A, but at the end of the day, you still need to know your debits and credits. You still need to be able to do the controllership side of things. So it's more being able to manage that as opposed to doing it hands-on. It's very rare in UAE we see strict FP&A roles and strict controllership roles. There's always a bit of a tandem between both.
Yeah, that's right. So this moves us to the next question, as you mentioned already about if we talk about some of the senior level roles like CFOs and the finance directors. So how what's your take on this?
Well, look, my take would be, firstly, Alchemy Search, we are a startup, so I wouldn't say we do get let's just say half dozen of these roles every quarter. We wouldn't be top heavy in them, as we're still growing as a business. There will be more exec search firms that will be more focused on that space. But look, what we see in the market is definitely more than there was this time last year. Companies see during COVID or the pandemic, people were replacing finance directors with finance controllers. People were replacing CFOs with finance directors. So the senior end of the market naturally had a knock-on effect. So what we're seeing now is roles are getting replaced with the same role. So a finance director now is getting replaced with a finance director. So that's seeing a bit of an upwards trajectory in that space. But in general, it's just slower. Again, it just comes back to the pyramid point. There's always going to be less roles at the top. But the big thing I would say, if you're in that position, it's a lot through network. UAE is a very network-friendly area where before a role gets to a recruiter or a headhunter, you can be guaranteed they've tried to fill it directly, or the company has tried to fill it through their own network. So my advice would be is just make yourself visible, and that's across the board for every role from junior up to senior. That if you're not visible, you're not going to be seen. You're not going to get approached. You know, for us as the recruiter, we've got a lot more candidates than jobs. So if you're not visible, if you're not building relationships, if you're not meeting the recruiter, it's very hard for us to sell a candidate in without, meeting them in person, because for a lot of roles, the CVs are the exact same. If you've got 5 newly qualified CVs from the Big Four, they're pretty much all going to be the exact same. Just the names will be different on the CVs. So it is more about the personality and getting a feel for that attitude and how you can gauge how suitable they are.
Exactly. I think that's really important point, as you mentioned, because I also, many recruiters, I think they got overwhelmed with the number of CVs and the emails that got, of course. So I believe I think, as you mentioned, first of all, they need to be more visible. I think the best platform is the LinkedIn. I think where you can demonstrate your personal brand, your unique strengths, what you have. And also, I think what is very important is to be very focused, because most of the time, like finance professionals, they just, keep on applying the jobs without any target area, without any focus. So what do you suggest in this, like how they need to be more focused in their approach?
Yeah, I think the big thing is, for candidates, if I put myself on the other foot, if I was the candidate looking for the job, when you speak to a recruiter, when you speak to HR, you need to explain exactly why you're right for the job, what experience, because you got to remember, these guys aren't finance people for the most part. So they just don't automatically know by looking at your experience that, oh, that's perfect, that's not perfect. So, when you see a role, for example, when we advertise roles, we usually put 3 or 4 bullet points. Do you have experience? Like, have you set up a finance function from scratch? You need to get a cover letter getting that across to the recruiter, ever may be, because that's all we're interested in. If the client gives us 3 or 4 points, if you have those things, then you need to lead on it, because that's what's going to attract the other side of the conversation. But yeah, it's very tricky. Unfortunately, it's one of those things where you might have to knock on 20 doors to get one door to open. But you just need to be persistent. The biggest difference with recruiting in this part of the world compared to, let's say, a more mature recruitment market like London, for example, that the recruiter, the job will find you, while here you find a job. That's the difference, because recruitment here is still very immature and how things are done. It's very slow. Getting feedback is tough. It just doesn't run as fluid as other parts of the world, and that is what it is. But yeah, it's unfortunately for the job seeker, you'll need to put a bit more effort in.
Yeah, exactly. So there are many questions coming in. I believe, Connor, we can take the questions as well.
Yeah.
As you mentioned about the startups in the UAE, many startups are coming on. So one question from Asma, she are asking like if you have experience in any startup, which is usually not there. Like many of the candidates, they don't have experience in the startup. So are they looking for someone with the startup experience only, or they consider like anyone have experience in other mature companies as well?
Well, look, with startups, and look, Alchemy Search, we're a startup. We're 1 year in business next month. It's a completely different minefield compared to when you're in a more structured corporate environment. And it's not a case where you have to have that experience, but it's a certain type of person. It's an attitude. It's being comfortable, being uncomfortable, I guess is probably the best way of describing it. Where if you're very process driven, having everything that works perfectly, then a startup's not going to be right. While if you're comfortable with the fact that there's going to be issues, there's going to be teething problems, that's an attitude, and that's something you don't see in a CV. That's something you don't see. Yeah, it's more the person itself, and you'll get a feel for that person. If they've got the right attitude, then they could be the right person. So to answer the question, of course, it's impossible. If for startups, how can you get experience if you don't have experience? It's only through getting experience. So again, it just depends on, if you speak with the hiring company, you get a good feel for them, they get a good feel for you. That's the risk the hiring person will have to take, but it's just the reality also.
Yeah, exactly. Completely. That's I think very valid point you raised. So the other point that comes obviously with the rising inflation as we are facing with unprecedented economic challenges. So as you also mentioned in your article as well, that salaries are increasing across the board. So what do you think? Like, what are the main reason, and like how much the hike in salaries the employer people can expect in this area?
Yeah. So again, this is in the article. It's very well discussed. So look, obviously the easy things are say inflation, all that sort of stuff, but there actually is other, I think, black and white things of why salaries are going to increase. Ultimately, you got to remember now, fortunately, the vast majority of people are in work in UAE. So if I'm going to recruit a position, I will need to approach people that are in jobs, and then naturally, it's tougher to convince them to leave a job compared to if all the candidates are immediately available and have no work. Of course, they need to get work. So the majority jobs you share with them, they're going to say yes, interested, yes, interested, yes, interested. Well, now they're not saying, yes, yes, yes. And if they are saying yes, they're saying, well, I need a good offer to leave. So if you think about it simply, if someone was on 20,000 dirhams and then they lost their job, they'd probably look at a job at 20,000 or between 20 and 15,000 to get another job. So if I've got all jobs at that level, companies will lowball, and then the market rate of that job goes down to 15K. Well, now the majority of candidates are on 20K, and if I say, hey, do you want a job for 20K? They'll say more than likely no, because I'm in a job. Why would I take the risk? So it's risk and rewards. The exact same role will go from 20 to 25K. So for someone to leave, they'll want 25K. Well, 18 months ago, the exact same level of experience and job would have been 15K. Now it's 25K. So the salaries are pushing up just because more people are in jobs. And then if people get bought back, so if someone's on 20K and they resign and their boss tries to buy them back, they get bought back. The company who's hiring is like, well, we need to offer 25K for that job now. So things are pushing up across. And it's to be honest with you, it's more of a case that they're just getting back to fair levels, because unfortunately in this part of the world, it's common practice to take advantage of people's situations. And I see it with obviously a lot of candidates we speak with that have been taken advantage of. So the rates, it's not a case that they're increasing by crazy amounts. They're just coming back to more relatively fair amounts, I would say.
Exactly. That's a really valid point, and I believe it all depends like where they are, like either at their own job or obviously it makes a difference. Very rightly mentioned. So, and this takes us to the next point. Like in terms of the skills, we know obviously the role of finance has been going through a tremendous transformation for the last couple of years. Obviously, with the emergence of emerging technologies. But what I see myself also in the UA, although we are talking about some emerging roles in finance, like finance business partner or strategic CFO from as compared to more traditional CFO. So, but in the Middle East, still we see there are some companies who need a more modern, new skill set from finance. But overall, what's is your view on the in terms of the skill sets specifically that the employers are looking for in finance and accounting, especially in the mid to senior level?
Okay, from mid to senior level, obviously the point we started on earlier on is around the startup, setting up something from scratch. That's definitely a pretty good skill set, I would say. And it's quite niche. Like the way to think about it is that for any role in UAE, no matter what it is, there's going to be lots of applications. People see with LinkedIn every day, a job gets posted after 3 hours, there might be 1,000 applicants.
Mhm.
Reality is 970 of them are probably not relevant, but that's the reality of what happens out here. So you need to say, well, how can I stand out from the pack? For example, if I was to recruit a head of finance role with a startup company and a head of finance role with an established business, my candidate pool for the head of finance role with the established business would be very big because a lot of people could do that job because processes are in place. Everything is there. It's just a plug and play. While if I was recruiting the head of finance role for the startup, my candidate pool would go from here to here because maybe 70-80% of the candidate pool mightn't be interested because they say, hey, I don't want to work in a startup. It's too risky. I've got no experience in that. I haven't got the time or the attitude to do that. So if you're that sort of person that wants that, you will have a lot better chance of getting the role than going for a role where you're competing against everyone from that sense. So that would be on the startup. The other big thing in mid to senior, which I've talked about in my article, is around IPOs. Again, in UAE over the last 12 months, there's been a surge in IPOs, listings, getting things ready for an IPO. So, I can give two good examples where there was one CFO role and then one finance director role. So two senior roles, which I was recruiting the last 12 months, where they needed IPO experience. One of them needed it from start to finish. The other one, the director one, needed one of readiness, that they've been there, done that. They would get a bit of help from the CFO, but they needed someone who would come in and do it. So for those two positions, a CFO role in Dubai, you've got hundreds of candidates potentially. For that role, I had 6 candidates. And if it was an open search, I would have had 600. Well, not 600, but I would have had a lot more people to go at. So having that skill set is really going to put you ahead. Like there's one guy I know who's in his 30s, and he has experience now that people in his 50s don't. So if he was going for a role against another CFO who's has more years of experience, there's no questioning that. But for what's in demand from the client or the hiring manager, the younger guy has it. So I think if you can get any exposure to that side, it's not going to put you ahead of the competition right now, but in a couple of years' time, that's what's going to make you stand out. In my opinion, I could be wrong, but that's what we're seeing in the market.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on this point. I think it's not about only the years of experience, but of course, the diversity of skill sets that they have, the diversity of exposure that they have. As you mentioned, obviously, sometimes the companies they need someone with specific experience, like IPO, and of course, it all depends, like the situation of the company, their growth and expansion plans. All it depends. So they need obviously a specific skill set. So there is some questions. I believe there are many questions that are similar. So I can combine them. Many people are asking, as you mentioned in your previous slides, that they need to make them visible. So they are asking, like, how can they make them visible? If you can give any tips. And
Okay, so visibility. for people who are in Dubai, for example, at the end of the day, we can all admit people live here. Dubai is very professionally racist, where it's obviously such a mix of different nationalities. Where I'm Irish, for example. There's a thing called the IBN, the Irish Business Network. I would be very confident. There must be an Indian one, a Pakistani one. There is a British one. So if you can sort of get into these communities where it's going to be a room full of your people per se, they're going to help you out more than anyone. I go to those meetings and I meet an Irish guy who works in this business. He connects me with someone in that business. It's all about being able to skip the queue. You got to remember, if you know that a company is hiring, and let's just say they're recruiting a management accountant in a global multinational company. If you apply for that role on LinkedIn, it's going to be one of 3,000 applicants. There's that little chance of you getting into that position. While if you know someone in your network, like for example, if I knew an Irish guy who was head of sales in that company, he'd be like, I'll introduce you. I'll email you to the CFO or to the HR or to the talent acquisition. That's as good as an introduction you're ever going to get. You're going to skip the whole of the LinkedIn queue. You'll end up in the email, the inbox of maybe the hiring manager, and because you'll be vetted effectively through your mutual contact, you might get a conversation. So it's about thinking, I think, a little bit outside the box of how can I skip the queue. So that's one way. Your own network, your own nationalities. That's just reality. I know people mightn't like that, but unfortunately, that's just the way the world works. Because you got to remember, if I see an Irish CV, I will understand their background a lot better than if I see a British CV or an Indian CV. While on my team, we have an Indian lady, Serbi. If she sees a CV from a candidate from India, she's going to understand, the universities, the A-level equivalent a lot better than me. So it's all about trying to strike that, common ground of skipping queues. So that's one example I'd say. If you're in Dubai or, UAE, just meeting people, it's very easy to network in Dubai, in my opinion. Get out, meet people for coffee. You can meet someone, they can introduce you to someone else. Because if you just stick in this sort of tunnel vision where you're just sticking to these contacts, you're not going to get anywhere. We're constantly building out our space where, if people don't know you, then they're never going to speak to you. So, obviously there's people like myself, recruiters. Recruiters can be traditionally quite difficult. I'm sure people have tried to get in touch with me, and it's impossible for us to respond to every single person. My LinkedIn is, it's there's a lot of, I try my best to respond, but look, it's very difficult, and you need to make yourself stand out. So people who are approaching people, even just little things like don't say hi sir or dear sir, say hi Connor, just little things like that where you need to just make it not look like it's just a generic message. So because it's very easy for us to see if someone just copy and pastes their CV into a message. I'm like, you're just sending this to 50 people and hopefully something sticks. But look, of course, I fully appreciate it can be quite tricky for recruiters to get back to people, and that's on their fault. And I'm sure I've made mistakes too, but trying to meet them, just saying, look, I'm in DIFC, can I meet you for a coffee? Make it as straightforward for them. Like our offices are in One Central, next door is DIFC. A lot of the big global agencies are in DIFC. So try and do like a milk round of meeting them. Because again, if I haven't met the candidates in person and I send the CV and the client rings me and says, hey, what are they like? What's their personality like? Have you met them? The minute I say no, then the credibility goes down quite a lot. While if I say, look, trust me, you've met them, I've met them, have a chat with them. So yeah, hopefully that helps a little.
Yeah, exactly. And from your conversation, I remember the one quote that your network is your net worth. So I believe building the network is really, as you mentioned, one of the key area that we need to build the network, meeting with people. And also, I think if they are more active on the LinkedIn, like if they are demonstrating their thought leadership on different areas. I believe that also from my own personal experience as well, I think that also attracts the attention of recruiters and the hiring managers, companies, if you are more active on LinkedIn and
Yeah,
if you
100%.
are, right.
Again, it just goes back to the point about being visible. You
Mm,
know, for example, like the article I've done on LinkedIn, it's just
mm,
going to generate traffic. You know, people
mm.
maybe that maybe had forgotten about me. They're like, oh, he still exists, and they might reconnect on something. So again, it's all visibility.
Exactly. And there is one good question. Even there are two or more questions from people who are outside UAE and they are planning to relocate to UAE. Obviously, they're looking for jobs. So and they are asking your suggestion in this area, like if they're outside UAE, is there a possibility of connecting with the recruiters and companies in the UAE by residing outside UAE, or they should be physically present here for face-to-face interviews? If you can
Yeah.
shed
So
some.
the I guess the reality is things have changed probably a little bit better now in the recent years that companies will do VC calls as first rounds, etc. So that obviously works better for candidates. But the challenge is that no matter what way we look at it, there is more candidates than jobs. So hiring companies, like I could speak to the best ever candidate in the world who's currently in Pakistan, for example, and he could be the best ever CV, everything, academics, brilliant. And I could send a CV to the client, and the client would say, "Okay, that's great, but who have you got here on the ground?"
Mm,
Companies aren't as willing to, and especially for unless it's a very niche skill set. So,
mm,
for example, if you're a corporate tax professional, that is niche, that is new. We don't have those people in Dubai that much.
mm.
While do we have finance managers in Dubai? Yeah, we've got truckloads of finance managers, finance controllers. Have we got them? Yes, we got loads of them. So my point is, companies will say, okay, yeah, but who have you got here? And then I'll say, oh, well, I've got this guy in Pakistan. He's like, okay, but we're not going to pay relocation, because the thing is with UAE compared to other parts of the world, there hasn't really been a lockdown. So people still want face to face. They want interaction. They want to interview in person. So it's very different to other parts of the world where remote working is the norm. The MS Teams interviews is the norm. In Dubai, it is very much still face to face and old school in that approach. So to answer the initial question in a roundabout way, look, of course, there's no harm in connecting, but my whole view on it is until someone has a ticket booked, we don't take them that serious. And that's just being very honest because you would not believe how many people message us every week saying, "Oh, I was in Dubai on holidays. I've come back. Let's just say I went back to Ireland. It's raining now. I want to get away from the rain." But they haven't thought of it. And until they said, "Look, I'm serious. I'm coming to Dubai on August." Let's just say, example, we're now the 18th of July. I get a message from someone saying, "Okay, Connor, I'm going to be in Dubai on the 5th of August. I'm going to relocate. I'm going to try and find a job. Will you meet me?" My answer would be yes. Well, if I get another message saying, "Hi, Connor, I've just got back from holidays. I'm thinking of moving to Dubai. What do you reckon?" I was like, "Well, it's going to be very difficult, just because there's enough good candidates, there's enough good talent on the ground in Dubai, that we don't need to parachute people in here anymore. Maybe I'm only here 5 years, but whatever, 15, 20, well, probably longer, 20, 25 years ago, there probably was a talent shortage in Dubai where they had to convince. It's like Saudi now. If you look at Dubai, Saudi is like Dubai 20, 25 years ago, where they still need to relocate people in there to do some of the jobs. So,
Exactly. Great, great. I think very valid point. And there is one more good question I can see from the attendees is like, what are the top three things a recruiter consider while shortlisting a senior finance professional? Like top three.
uh, top three things. I think the personality is going to be very important because no matter what anyone says, at that level, you only get to that level by being pretty good at the job. You don't get to CFO or finance director by being not very good. I was in finance, I left it because I wasn't very good. So I never would have got to that position. But if you get to CFO or finance director, you've obviously done something right where a lot of the CVs are going to look quite similar. Start a career, boom, 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 boom. So what makes someone different? And it is the personality, it's the leadership skills. Can they manage a team? Can they grow a business? Can they turn around a business? So I think the biggest thing in UAE for anyone that has worked in other parts of the world, a lot of the big companies are here, but what goes on inside the companies is very different than other parts of the world. There's always rooms to improve. So if you can show clear process improvement, that's going to be good. But the big thing I would say is the personality. It's as much about, can the CFO get on with the CEO? And if there's going to be a clash of personalities, or because culturally we are so diverse, the unfortunate reality is certain backgrounds mightn't mix as well. And that's completely out of the person's control, which again, it's probably not giving a great answer because certain things won't click. But yeah, I think for any senior person, it's having a concise CV. Nobody really cares about what you did 20 years ago or 15 years ago. And I mean that in a professional manner. Like, if you have a CV of 6 or 7 pages, no one's going to read past page 2 or 3. People only really care about your last 5 years. What have you done in the last 5 years? Because that's where you're really adding value. If you're a CFO, nobody cares what you got in your exams 15, 20 years ago. Did you get your ACA? Okay, well done. That's the market. And I think I did also see a question on the age point, because that's always a thing at this level. The way the market is now in UAE, look, once someone gets close to 60, it really is at the discretion of the employer. It can be frowned upon, but then also it can be seen that this guy's a plug and play. They're going to do a couple of years and then they're going to ride off into the sunset. So what's happening a lot in the market is that in Saudi, because Saudization is a lot more prevalent now, is that it's very difficult for an expat to get a job at mid to junior level, I would say, where it's a lot of Saudis doing those positions. While at the senior end, they will take people, senior expats from Dubai who maybe have lost their job and get them into Saudi for a couple of years. And, it's sort of a good deal because they make a bit of money and then they move on, and then a Saudi takes that position. So, yeah, look, it's really to do with the discretion of the company, I would say. I guess, to put it simply, common sense isn't very common in this part of the world. So, yeah. It's tricky.
Yeah, exactly. That's very right. I think, yeah. So I think, as you mentioned, the top 3 skills, the number 1, as you mentioned, the personality, the leadership skills. And I think, as you mentioned, about how they can help the business to grow. So that's their strategic thinking skill, or you can say the strategic leadership as well. And even these are the areas, even because most of the finance professionals, they focus more on their accounting or, technical accounting or finance, corporate finance. Of course, those are required, but very rightly, as you mentioned, as we move up to the level of CFO or finance director, what's more important is the leadership skills and the strategic thinking skills. And that's what, even in our current program on next generation CFO leadership program, our focus is more on these areas, on the leadership, on the strategic thinking, strategic leadership, and also on the emerging areas of technology. So I think it's perfectly aligned with what you say. So I believe we have covered lots of questions already, what was there in the chat box. So just as we are moving to the end of our webinar, so the last question, and even this was one of the questions from audience as well, what industries are hiring and expected to hire in the coming months in your view?
Okay, so yeah, look, from our side, so we only cover industries within commerce and industry, so we don't deal with any banks, financial services, bar fintech. So look, in the consultancy space, there's always hiring. So, your Big Four, Grant Thornton, boutique consultancies, they're constantly hiring. The reasons why, I'd say the biggest reason is because everyone's chargeable. So people will hire because they know they're going to make money, because they're going to charge out that candidate to a client and they make money quite quickly. Well, the shift that this region needs is from finance to go from being viewed as a cost center to a value add. I think that's the biggest challenge in this part of the world, where the chairman doesn't sometimes see the value that finance can bring to the business. But I think that is turning, because a lot more commercial finance is happening in the market. So where has been hiring? Look, lawyers, professional services, those guys make money no matter what's happening in the world. There's quite a bit of hiring there. There's been a bit in oil and gas, which obviously slowed down quite a bit a few years back. E-commerce is very big. A lot of startups in the e-commerce space, so that seems to be the sort of sexy area for startups. A lot of e-commerce startups, FMCG, obviously consumer goods. So in UAE, they're obviously trying to diversify their portfolio away from just sort of oil and gas, etc. And then I think the biggest area has been fintech, so financial technology. There's a lot happening in that space. And if I was a junior to mid-level candidate, if I had an opportunity in fintech, I would really look at it, because as you develop as a candidate, at the senior end, there's not that many candidates because it's a new industry, so to speak. So again, if you're thinking about competing for a finance director job, CFO job in 5, 10, 15 years, there's not that much candidates in that space. So even for now, we had to recruit a fintech CFO. There's very few candidates. Well, if I have to recruit an oil and gas CFO, there's obviously a lot of people who've worked in oil and gas. So if you just think about it strategically, there's different ways, different industries. And the way UAE is, they're going to invest a lot of money in those industries. So I think it's a good space to be in.
Great. I think, yeah, perfectly, very valid. And I think we have covered most of the questions that were posted by audience. So I believe you have covered some great insights, and I think the existing trend, what's going on, what is expected in the market. So I believe it's quite useful for our audience who join us from different parts of the region, Middle East region. So for any further, obviously, as you know, Alchemy Search, they are actively involved in the recruitment across the Middle East region, especially in UAE, in Saudi, and they have many active roles. And their team as well, so you can connect with them on the LinkedIn. And if you think you are suitable and your profile is quite relevant for the roles, of course you should reach out to them, and also for the upcoming roles as well. So with here, we would like to conclude our webinar. So Connor, thank you very much for your time. I believe you are quite busy always in your recruitment activities, so we are highly thankful to you for taking out time to hear your insights.
No, thank you. And I think thanks everyone for joining the call. Hopefully some of the information will help. And my advice would be, if you can, guys, have a look, connect on LinkedIn and just check. I think if the link to the article is in the comments box, definitely have a look at the article, because I think it will definitely paint a bit of a picture for how I see things. I could be wrong, but hopefully it's not too far off. And thank you again.
Sure. Yeah, we have shared the link in the chat box, as well as we will share by email as well. And the recording of this webinar, because many people are at their work, so I believe they send me message like they were not able to join. So no worries, the recording is available on our YouTube channel, and we will share the recording as well as the link to Connor article via our email in the next couple of hours. So thank you very much, all of you, for your time. I believe some great insights shared by Connor. Thank you very much, Connor, and we hope to see you again in our upcoming webinars.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Thank you. Have a good day. Cheers.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Have a nice day.